Today we're going to be learning about classes and objects. A class is a blueprint or a template for creating different objects which defines its properties and behaviors. An object is an instance of a class.
What is a class? A class is a template that is used to create objects and to define object data, types, and methods. Classes are created to be used by many different objects that require the same basic components. An example would be using a class to set and output an employee's name and number.
This is a class that will multiply two numbers together and return its value. We're going to give you step-by-step directions on how to create your own class based on this one.
First, you will instantiate the class by typing the class declaration. The class declaration is formed by an access level, the word class, and the class name. It looks something like public class, classes and objects project. We then type our open bracket. The keyword class lets the program know that it can be used by other classes, and that is not a main method. Inside the open bracket comes the variables, the constructor, and the method. The variables are the names of values stored in memory. An example looks like int number equals 20. Now the variable number will hold a value of 20.
Next, we create our constructor. A constructor is a sequence of instructions packaged as a unit that is used to initialize an object in a class. An example in real life would be if you were buying a bike. Each bike may have the same blueprint, but they may all be constructed in different ways. Each constructor is unique to its own parameters. When we create our constructor, we begin by typing the access level followed by the class name, then parentheses. Our constructor looks like public classes and objects project followed by parentheses. Notice how the name of the constructor is the same as the class name. In the parentheses are our parameters. Parameters are variables that come from our client code. We use parameters to assign variables in our class in new values, either from another class or from our client code. We then put our open bracket and assign our variables the parameter values. Then we close our brackets to end the constructor.
In this code, we have what we call an overloaded constructor. An overloaded constructor is when you have more than one constructor. A reason for this would be to give the user different options on how to create the object. An example would be to create one constructor without parameters to set default values to the variables, while we create the other constructor with parameters to set new values to the variables.
Finally, we have our methods. The methods control what the class does and what is sent to the client code or another class. A method is a package of code that is applied to an object to get a new value, set a value, or return a value. Methods have two parts, the method declaration and the body. The method declaration consists of the access level, return type, method name, and parameters, all in that order. An example of a method declaration is public double multiply num followed by parentheses. This declaration means that the method can be used by other methods or codes, and that it must return a double value. The body includes other variables and/or what you want the method to do, like set the name value to a variable. If the return type was a string, int, or double, you could then add a return statement at the end of the method that allows the method to return that type of variable value.
Now we're going to talk about objects. What is an object? An object is an instance of a class that is defined by the user in the client code. The user defines the necessary variables for instantiating an object in a class and uses the object to call methods in the class.
These are the steps to create an object in the main method. In order to call the class in the main method, we have to instantiate an object. To instantiate an object, you have to use the name of the class you are creating the object for. An example would be classes and objects project object equals new classes and objects project followed by parentheses. You want to make sure you include the necessary parameters for the constructor in the parentheses after instantiating your object. To have an object call a method from the class is simple. You have to code object.methodName followed by parentheses with the necessary parameters, and the object will call the method, which will then run the appropriate values. To output a value, start with your basic print statement, system.out.println followed by parentheses, and then put your object.methodName in your parentheses. It should look like this, system.out.print, within parentheses, object.methodName, parentheses, close parentheses.
This is what the code outputs when we don't enter any parameters in the object declaration. Since we have an overloaded constructor in the class, the variables will be set to default values and the code will run using these values. This is what our code outputs when we enter specific values in the object declaration. Notice how the values line up with the necessary data types in our constructor parameters. The class runs using these values instead of the default values.